Okay, good morning. My name is Gary Matsuoka, and we're here at Laguna Hills Nursery in Santa Ana. It's a Saturday morning, and today's class is on roses. Now, we don't have much roses to sell. It is fall, almost the middle of fall, and we only have a few roses left in stock, but we're getting ready and we're starting to pre-sell the roses the bare root roses that will be arriving in December. So we get our rose shipment, over 1,000 plants arrive here, right around the week before Christmas. So they're usually ready to sell by Christmas, and then we usually have them around till the end of January, and people buy them and sell them at that time. So we're going to introduce some of them to you. So everybody wants to grow things that look about like this. So the most popular rose in the world is Double Delight, which I have one actually from my yard. This is about half the size it would be in the spring. So after a heat wave, the roses are quite a bit smaller. Plus, we're getting attacked by some bugs. So roses can be as easy to grow as you want them to be, or if you want perfect roses, you're going to have to do a lot of work, because we've got, over the last 50 years or so, we've gotten, in this area at least, new diseases. Like 2 new diseases have shown up, maybe 3, and several new pests have come in that we didn't see back in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s even. Right around the 1990s, we started, with worldwide travel and all that, a lot of the diseases and pests around the world have come in. So now, if you want a perfect rose, you pretty much have to spray every week or 2 to keep them that way. If you just want a nice looking rose, you don't have to do any spraying. If you want roses better than your neighbors, then you'll probably have to do a little bit of spraying. So a lot of the roses have become, rose industry has shrunk a lot in the last 20 years because of the perception that, and part of it's true, of course, that you need to spray roses to keep them really nice. Now, we don't carry the quote landscape roses. So there are landscape roses now that are very immune to a lot of the rose diseases and even some of the pests. But they're not what we specialize in. So they're just roses that make a lot of flowers. The individual flowers aren't that exciting like some of the roses that we sell, but they're colorful and they bloom most of the year. So, but we carry the ones that usually the florists, they're florist quality roses. You put in vases, they got great fragrance, wonderful form. Now, we'll mention that the Double Delight rose is one of what we call the classic rose shape. So the classic roses, like back in the old days, my computer is for some reason real slow today. The classic rose that, we had a Rose Society form in, I'm not sure, of the 1960s, because roses were so popular and there were a lot of clubs where people would grow roses. They had a lot of events where they would grade your roses. Well, in America, they like the classic rose form, which is got a spiral petals, lots of them, with a pinpoint center. And this rose here, which we sold in the 1980s, called Lagerfeld rose, everyone said the buds are like pencil points. The really sharp center on this rose. So that was the classic rose, was spiral petals and a very narrow center. Now, in Europe and in the old areas, the roses were often like this, and that wasn't the classic form. This is an old-fashioned or English-style rose, which has gotten a lot of favor in the last 20 years. So when breeders, there's a lot of rose breeders around the world that bred for roses. In America, they threw these away because no one wanted these. They wanted the ones with the single center. But now these are becoming more popular again. So we have a lot more different roses we can sell you now, shape-wise. And, I have a lot of customers complain that the roses today don't have any fragrance. Well, it's not the rose, because roses, we still have the same roses that we've had from half a century. Oh, my pictures are disappearing here. Well, we have the same rose we've had from the last half century, but as people age, their sense of smell disappears. So everyone's telling us, the roses don't have any fragrance nowadays like they had when they were younger. Well, part of it is us. So now the one thing you have to be careful of, back in 20, 30 years ago, they told us that rose catalogs are the world's best fiction. So, they do a lot of touch-ups to make the roses look perfect. But it is true, most of the roses at some point in the year, they'll look like the photos in this book. So this company, Weeks Roses, which introduced Mr. Lincoln Rose a long time ago, they've got some of the best photos in the business that I think. Some of their photos absolutely make the roses look perfect, and the roses don't look like that very long during their time on the bush, but they've captured it. Whereas this company, Star Roses, which is the biggest rose company in the world, a lot of the photos that they use, I don't know. I've talked to the sales reps saying, well, you can sell more roses if your pictures were a little better, because they've saved a lot of photos from the early days, when we first met them 40 years ago, that just don't look like the rose at its best, like Double Delight. This is their picture of Double Delight, and that's like 2 days after it was at its peak. It just is not as pretty. So, but they just won't update their rose pictures to show the rose at their best. And even this rose of Dolly Parton, if you see Dolly Parton rose in person, it's way better looking than that. It glows.
What would be the reason that they wouldn't update it?
Don't know.
I mean, updating improves technically improves the attractability of it.
Yeah. Of course, they're a wholesale company, so they don't talk to the people that buy from them are nurseries, and we know what the roses look like. So it's not imperative that they, like, here's Dolly Parton when you see it and a little closer. I mean, roses look a lot better in person because they're three-dimensional, but Dolly Parton in person looks way better than that photo they had. That photo was dull. Dolly Parton's a real glowing orange red. So okay, so we've got different styles of rose growing too, although they're all very similar. So the basic rose that we sell a lot of is called the hybrid tea. And the roses that you get from the florist, the single stem roses, those are hybrid teas. That's definition of hybrid tea is a single stem with one rose on the end. Now this is a spent rose. I didn't have anything that I could show you at the moment that has one nice rose on the end. We've we've sold out most of our rose bushes for the year. In fact, I have less than 10 left out there, so they've been picked through. So the hybrid tea generally in the garden has stems that are vase-like with flowers at the top of each stem, and generally they're, I would say, 4 to 6 foot tall and 3 to 4 foot wide. So that's hybrid tea. And then you have floribunda. So hybrid teas are cut flower roses. Not the prettiest plants often, although some of them are very nice looking, but basically they're to make cut flowers. Floribundas, on the other hand, are for the landscape, so they tend to be shorter, bushier, and have clusters of flowers at the ends of each stem. So those tend to be prettier in the landscape. Not necessarily good cut, but pretty in the landscape. And they tend to be 3 to 4 foot tall and, well, 3 to 4 foot wide. So shorter and bushier in general. And then these are the two classifications they use in Europe. In the United States, we have another one called grandiflora, which is somewhere in between. So it's a taller bush with often 3 to 5 flowers in a cluster. And grandifloras are usually good cut roses too. They have longer stems than the floribundas. The only reason that there's these two, because a lot of hybrid teas will try to make more than one flower on each stem. Like this Double Delight is a normal hybrid tea, but you can see on this branch it made 3 buds. Well, the distinction between hybrid tea and grandiflora is that the hybrid tea flowers tend to look better if you eliminate the side buds. It makes the central flower better looking, as the classic form that dictates. So it'd make a better single flower. Whereas the grandifloras, if you eliminate the side buds, the center flower that you leave will have too many petals and won't look like what we want them to look like. Too much energy in one flower. That what I mean by eliminating buds is as the flowers develop, as the stem grows, you take off the side buds to get more energy into the center bud, and the grandifloras don't look right that way. They look better if you allow them to have more flowers on the end of each stem, whereas the hybrid teas usually look better with just one flower on each stem. It's a pain. It's a lot of work. So most of our customers I know don't do that. They just let it do what it wants to do. But when people were really into roses, I would say the rose craze was at its peak in the 80s and 90s, where one company in the United States was selling 20 million roses a year. So, and in fact, if you're alive in the 1980s and 90s, every single household in the United States got a catalog from Jackson Perkins, which was the biggest rose company, or the biggest nursery in the world at that time. And now they're in name only left. That company's been bought and went bankrupt 4 or 5 times in the last 40 years now. But one of the reasons is they sent a catalog to every household. I just can't imagine how expensive that would be to do that. but that's what they were doing back in the 80s and 90s. So roses were, and they still are extremely popular, but you know, in the 1990s, we were actually selling 14,000 roses a year. Nowadays, 1,500. So maybe a tenth of what we used to do. But, you know, that's still a lot of plants. That's still more than any other flowering bush that we sell. So they're still real popular. So we get these roses in December as a bare root. So a bare root, of course, I can't show you a plant at the moment, but they look like, so the roses are grown in the Central Valley of California. In fact, most of the bare roses in the US are grown in the Central Valley of California because it's got perfect weather for growing. So like Bakersfield area, hot and dry all summer, so you get very few diseases. You know, from mid-spring through mid-fall, no rain, very few diseases show up on the roses. And most of the diseases are rain related. And then come the time to harvest, which is late fall throughout winter, they get a lot of what is called tule fog up there, where, you know, it's just this cloud covers the entire area the whole day. I mean, they have a lot of traffic accidents because of that. It's just thick fog. And what they do to harvest these roses that they grow in the ground, and, you know, they're spaced maybe 6 or 8 inches apart. Well, I think they're closer than that. 4 to 6 inches apart. They grow these roses in the ground. They just plow them out of the ground and collect them and process them, cut off a lot of the root, cut off a lot of the top, so they're all squared off. And then they store them. Usually they store them in green warehouses that have sprinklers, so they don't have to cover them or anything, but they just kind of mist them all day to keep them moist. And then they package them up and send them to us in late December. They grow them for 2 years. Now, roses can be grafted or on their own roots. So you can make a rose plant by taking cuttings and rooting them in a greenhouse. And once they get roots, you put them out in the field. Or they graft them in the field. So the roses that are grafted, both of these are grafted roses. This trunk on this plant is a Dr. Huey rose. It's a special climber that makes these really long, straight stems. And here, this tree rose is grafted onto a long, straight stem of Dr. Huey climbing rose. So when they grow roses in the field, they take a section of this Dr. Huey stem, stick it in the ground, and it roots itself and starts to grow. And once it grows for a few months, they take the buds from the rose that they want to graft onto it. They just carve out a bud on the stem, make a slit in the side of this Dr. Huey stem, stick it in that slit, and then cut off the top of the Dr. Huey climbing rose. So all they have left is this one bud, which then grows out. First year it kind of is one-sided, and then they cut it way back to a stub in that first winter. And then the second year it grows out a little fuller. You can see this is still kind of one-sided. So on this rose, this is the Dr. Huey stem here. And you see it's still kind of facing one direction. But it fills in different ways as it grows. This one is it's still one-sided, but it's a lot closer to being symmetrical. So when you get grafted roses, they're not totally symmetrical. They have, they're kind of one-sided.
Does it say when you buy it if it's a grafted rose?
You can see it.
Oh, sorry.
So when they're grafted, when a rose is grafted, So when the bare root rose, it comes to you, it's grafted, it's got roots. This is the Dr. Huey part, and then the graft is on one side. So the stems kind of come off like this. If it's an own root rose, you just see stems and no graft. It's smooth right there, whereas this has got this cut off section and strange bark on one side because it's not the same plant. They just stuck them together. So the advantage of own root roses, and everybody's growing more and more of them, is that there's no suckers. Anything that comes off this plant is going to be that rose, whereas anything that comes off this area of this rose is going to be the Dr. Huey rose, which is a red climber that blooms once a year. So I get people excited when they calling, this happened twice in the last couple of years. Someone calls me up and says, I've got my iceberg is red. And I tell them, well, if it blooms more than once, then you've got something there, because the red iceberg rose is going to be worth millions of dollars. But they never call me back. So it was just a sucker from a Dr. Huey rose that was blooming. And if it doesn't rebloom, then you know it's Dr. Huey. Because the flowers are about the size of iceberg flowers. So this has disadvantages. The reason why they graft roses is because some roses won't grow their own roots. So some varieties of roses won't. Well, any rose can, but some are not so good at doing it. So it's quicker to grow the rose if you graft it than if you try to grow its own root system. Some roses are very good at growing their own roots, so they're sold as own root roses. Some are real terrible at it, so they graft them onto Dr. Huey, which is a real easy rose to grow and root. And they do make these tree roses out of stems of Dr. Huey, and then they graft the rose on top of it. Yes.
So we have a house, and when we got the house, there was the walkway up that had several roses, and we're novices, we don't understand, and so I just go out there and look, and this thing is going all over the place, and it's beautiful flower and stuff like that. And so and I've heard you before, you say you could take a chainsaw, just go straight across. Can you do any damage to your plant if let's say you see some things don't look good going this way, and the other stuff is going, which you would indicate would be an indication of a graft? Can you do any damage by cutting the part that looks like it's dead, or does that affect the plant?
Well, roses sometimes don't do what you want them to, and sometimes if you cut them, they don't regrow. So that's the issue. I mean, most plants and most roses, you can cut them anywhere, and they'll regrow new branches, and hopefully they'll grow the way you want them to. Sometimes they don't do that either, but hopefully when you cut them back, then you'll grow new branches. But as the roses get older and they start making a lot of bark, when they're young, the branches are green, and as they get older, they get covered by a gray bark, and sometimes you cut it down to that and nothing ever sprouts again. So you've just killed your rose plant. So it's hard to say. They say, if it's all bark left, and that's all you see, it may not ever regrow. If you have any green stem at all sticking out of there, or smooth stem rose branches, then it should resprout where you cut, if you cut it to there. But if you go down and you just have this massive trunk left with bark on it, and you cut it down to that, it may never regrow.
Do they have a definitive life?
Well, yes and no. So grafted roses, generally they have a life because a graft is imperfect. So now, it's not always the case, because if this gets covered with dirt, these things start to root out. They will root through their stems above the graft, and then it'll live longer. But grafted plants tend to have shorter lives, like 40, 50 years, because the graft usually fails. When you have two different plants growing together, one usually outgrows the other, and they lose their connection because they have a thin bark area where they're connected. And if one outgrows the other, they eventually lose that connection, the proper connection. So they die, whereas an own root rose essentially can live forever. Now, forever is not forever, unfortunately, because all plants get old and die as they fill the ground around them with their own dead roots. So roses, what we're told is, like grafted roses, if you get 10 good years out of them, that's decent. They expect 10 good years out of a rose. But we have a lot of customers who have 20-year-old, 30-year-old rose bushes, but a lot of them usually die along the way because of the graft, or the fact that there's so much dead rose root in the ground now that they just give up trying to grow there. So like any other plant, if you replace a rose, there is a replant syndrome. So if you have an old rose in the ground, your ground's now full of dead rose roots, or if you pull out a healthy rose, you just now have ground that's full of dying rose roots. You put another rose in the middle of that, it won't kill it, but it certainly won't do well. Because I used to have 50 rose garden, and I replaced roses every year before I knew this stuff. And the rose that I would replace would bloom once and sit there the rest of the year with nothing, no new growth. Whereas the original rose next to it did its thing. But the rose I replaced and put next to the original rose wouldn't do anything. And I thought, well, this is weird. Then we finally read, American Rose Society has a magazine, and they talked about the replant syndrome for quite a few years in the 1980s. And I go, okay, can't grow roses here anymore, so I just plant hibiscus, and the hibiscus did fine. They're not related at all, and they don't care if there's a dead rose root in the ground, and the hibiscus did fine. Now, what we do nowadays, if you want to replant a rose garden, we know that you can just replace the soil, and the amount you should replace would be, maybe this much, maybe not all the way. This is a 1.5 cubic feet, 1 cubic foot of soil replaced, where you put a new rose, will allow it to grow pretty much uninhibited by the dead rose roots surrounding it. One of our employees found out he had a 100 rose garden, and he would replace roses all the time. He said one cubic foot bag of our potting soil was perfect. You just take the rose out, put the new rose in, surround it with one bag of our potting soil, and it would do just fine compared to the rest of his roses. So that's important. If you replace roses, do note that there is a what I just called it, the replant syndrome, and that's why the farmers who grow the roses in the ground, so they grow roses in the field for 2 years, and then for the next 3 years they lease the land out to other farmers to grow other crops, because they can't grow the roses in there for the next 3 years after growing roses for 2 years in that soil. And if the rose has been there longer than 2 years, then you might have to wait 5 years before you can grow same rose in that spot. Max amount of time would be 10 years wait. If the roses were in there like 20 years, you'd have to wait 10 years for all those dead roots to clear out of that area. So, or just replace the dirt. So, okay, so we've got this bare root rose. We always order grade 1, and a grade 1 bare root rose would be about, usually the roots are 8 to 12 inches long, and then they usually, grade 1 would have a minimum of 3 stems on it that are somewhere between pencil and finger thick.
Yeah, I've got some great bags.
That's grade number 1. Grade 1.5, which we don't usually order, but sometimes we get it, only has one stem on it that's between pencil and finger thick. And you don't want to go grade 2. That's no stems that are as thick as a pencil. The industry basically doesn't sell grade 2 roses. So, they use 1 and 1.5 because any lower number than that, I guess, sounds really bad. They don't want to sell you a grade 2 rose, which doesn't really exist. So 1.5 to make it sound like it's almost as good as grade 1, but grade 1.5 is a lot worse than grade 1. And grade 1 often has, when we get them, they often have 5 or 6 or even more stems. So we like to carry the nicer bare root roses, because the roses that most places sell in those little plastic bags, what they do, the way they package them is they use a machine that bags them. And the rose that they can put in those little plastic bags that you see at some stores, it's got to fit through a metal hoop that's about this big. So the entire rose plant has to fit through that. So we get the roses that don't fit through those little metal rings, because when they go through the metal ring, then it gets put right into a bag and it closes it up. So they have to put the real small roses, at least slender branches, through that metal ring to get it into the bag, whereas we get all these nice ones that won't fit in the bags. So we get hybrid teas, floribundas, grandifloras that way. We also get bare root tree roses, but we don't sell them bare root. And the reason for that is if we have a bad Santa Ana, like last January, was it January 7th, Santa Ana, and these things are not fully rooted yet, and they're sitting in someone's yard with 70-mile-an-hour dry winds, the tops just shrivel up. If the roots are not totally functional at that moment, you can't protect a rose sitting in the middle of your garden. It just dries up. And we had so many of those instances in the last 10 years. Back in the 80s and 90s, we sold bare root tree roses and we didn't have too many returns. In fact, I don't even remember any. But starting about 10 years ago, we've had a lot of Santa Anas in winter. And we're getting so many returns, we said, okay, we can't do this anymore. We know how to save them. You just lay them on the ground and cover them with a wet blanket for a week, and then they rehydrate the stems, and then we can replant them and put them in a quiet corner of the nursery and let them grow without the wind hitting them. So now we don't even sell these anymore because we'd get too many returns of desiccated tree roses. We just would put them in a 5-gallon bucket, set them in a quiet corner where the winds didn't hit. Fortunately, we have a lot of buildings on the northeast side of our property, which blocks a lot of the Santa Anas. So we can find quiet corners in the nursery. We can just stick these and let them root in and grow out the tops without the wind drying them up. Now, if you get a bare root rose and you take it home, you can still have that same problem. On some properties, if we have bad Santa Anas, it will dry up the rose before it's rooted. It takes about 2 weeks for these roses to root out real nicely. So normally when you plant a bare root rose, you just make a hole in the ground. And if you've got decent soil, the rose will grow. But do note that on roses, the sandier the soil, the more vigorously they grow. Florist roses are usually grown in pure sand because they want the longest stems. They grow really long stems in pure sand. If you've got clay soil, they're still fine as long as it's not a low wet spot. So In my yard, we noticed I had roses next to my sidewalk where it was real low and the water was just kind of sitting there, and the roses didn't do too well in that low spot. So I put some blocks along the sidewalk to raise the area up about 4 inches, and the roses did really fine with that. So raising heavy soil up just a few inches really helps with getting air into the clay. But a friend of mine has her roses in this is her soil, and she's got a whole rose bed in it, and they look fine. They grow fine. Not real tall. I mean, most of her roses are about like this. Where once when I did roses in our own potting soil, they grew too tall. So I won't do that again. I had roses in the ground, and I put our potting soil in there, and the floribundas, which are supposed to be 3 foot, were all 5 foot. I said, well, that's a little taller than I wanted them. But the more coarse and airy your soil is, the more vigorous they grow. I had a friend once who was an oil consultant in Arabia, Saudi Arabia, and he had a trailer parked on the sand. He wanted to grow roses. He was, homesick for his rose garden. So he planted roses in pure sand, which people told him, oh, they won't grow there at all in pure sand. He said his roses were taller than his trailer. He couldn't believe how tall they got. That's why florist roses are grown in pure sand, because you get these really long stems.
Here's a question. I mean, we think of plants and soil as a relationship, correct? And you're telling me that a rose in pure sand, what is it getting out of the sand?
Air.
Other than aeration. It sounds like just...
That's it.
Well, where is it getting its nutrients to grow?
From the surface. So in nature, we've had a lot of soil classes, but in nature, soil is 99.1% mineral, no nutritional value.
Okay.
It's 0.9% dead roots. But in nature, there's also 5 inches on average of dead leaves on top of the ground. That's where all the nutrients are held for most plants. I mean, if you have weeds, so the pioneer plants of, if you have a forest fire or a landslide or anything like that, a flood, you have this virgin land now where nothing's growing at the moment. Well, there are certain plants that are specialized to mine the dirt. They can concentrate all the minerals out of that dirt. They're called weeds. So mustard, a lot of foxtail grasses around here. If you have a vacant lot that, they bulldoze the land and you got a vacant lot, these weeds can mine that soil and get the nutrients out of it. And then after a few years of weeds, there's a layer of dead weeds on top of the ground. And at that point, the other plants can come in, steal the nutrients from the dead weeds and start growing. So that's how nature works. There's some pioneer plants. All the rest of the plants recycle dead stuff. And most of the plants that we sell recycle dead stuff. Some grasses we sell do not. And some vegetables we sell are pioneer plants. So mustard, cabbage, kale, they are pioneer plants. They really don't need any dead stuff laying there to grow. They can mine the ground. They won't be pretty. Most weeds are really small plants, but they can do it. And then once they build up a layer of dead stuff, then, over time, the birds poop on the ground, animals poop on the ground, and they get more and more nutrients laying on top of the ground, then the other plants just take over. So most plants use what is called a mycorrhizal recycling system. There's fungus in the ground that are attached to the roots of the rose, that this fungus goes up to the layer of dead stuff called duff, and they take all the nourishment out of it, including organic fertilizers you might throw on the ground, and they will recycle them right back into the plant. So truffles are a form of mycorrhizal fungi that live on the oak trees of France, and they're responsible for recycling the dead leaves getting back to the tree.
Would you, just as a general thing, would you recommend that you, when you put in a new rose, or maybe a pre-existing one that's relatively young, would you fertilize it as part of the natural expectation of a bountiful blooming, or would you just let mother? Because I'm always cleaning up the junk on the top.
Right.
That.
Well, yeah, if you don't have any dead stuff laying on top of the ground, you've got to fertilize. So all the dead stuff is nature's fertilizer. If you remove it, then you've got to spend money on prettier fertilizer and put it on the ground.
But no, seriously. I mean, I spend too much time I see the plant and I'm cleaning off the stuff and throw it in the garbage can, and that might not be the right thing around. It needs. So the rose needs on top material that can be absorbed by the root system.
Right. In nature, all the plants want their dead leaves right there. They don't want you to take them away. They can recycle those dead leaves that you leave on the ground. So they don't.
Do you take the dead leaves off your rose bushes at your house?
Yeah. But I replace them with a good organic compost that looks prettier. I throw the dead leaves. So now my current house, I lease it, so I don't do anything in there. But at my last house, we would every once a year. Well, we'll talk about that in a few moments here.
Okay.
I want to talk about planting the bare roots first. So you take this bare rose, we put them in plastic bags filled with water and wet paper so that they don't dry out. So even though plants are covered with wax, it's not perfect. And plus you have a lot of cut ends that can dry up. So we have you take home the plants in plastic bags. And then when you get ready to plant them, and the plastic bags are clear, so don't leave them out in the sun. If it's 80 degrees and it's sunny and it's in the bag, it'll be 100 degrees in there in no time, and you'll burn your roses right up. So keep them in the shade, but don't leave them out at night if we have a frost. Now, we haven't had a bad frost in like 20 years. So we may never see a frost. Well, we've seen this before. So nature goes back and forth. So in history, the 19 teens were the really cold years. 1930s were really hot years. 1950s and 60s were cold years. 70s and 80s were hot years. When they started doing global warming, it was the hot years. And then got hotter and hotter till about 2015, and it's cooling off again. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, when you plant them, you want to make a hole big enough to get the roots in the ground. So that's the soil. Usually the graft is 3 or 4 inches above the ground. However, if you live in Minnesota, you want the graft underground because if it freezes, you lose your entire rose. So in Minnesota, they'll plant the rose this deep. You can plant roses this deep. I've done it just to see if there's any problem with that. And there's not. When I planted my roses this deep, all these stems rooted out. But originally, the rose was with the graft about 3 inches, 4 inches above soil level. So that's all you have to do. But there's no problem with planting them like they do in Minnesota to get them real deep in the ground to protect that from frost. We no longer put compost in the ground. So back in the 80s, my first rose garden, we didn't know this. So I made that soil as rich as I could. I made it like 1/3 compost. And what happened, the roses looked fine. They rooted out of their stems, and all these roots turned black and died. And at that point, when I noticed that, because I had dug some roses out to replant them with other roses, I thought maybe I planted them too deep by doing this. So they rooted out here, but they lost all the roots down here. No, it was the compost that I put in the ground that killed all those roots. So if you load this up with 1/3 compost, the compost is using up too much oxygen. So near the surface, the roots were fine, and the roses were fine. They looked fine. But down here, a foot deep, they couldn't breathe at that level. So they just died. So I had all these black roots down here, healthy rose roots up here. The plants look fine, and I'll never do that again. So in those days, the more compost you mix into the dirt, supposedly the better results. Well, apparently whoever was telling us that didn't check to see what happened, because I checked to see what happened, and that's what happened. And I thought, you know, these people know what they're talking about, so I must have planted the rose too deep. But now we know the compost kills the roots for the reason that it's using too much oxygen. So if the roots don't get air, they just rot away. They die and rot away. But the rose adapted to that. So roses can take, you know, if you put too much compost in the ground, they'll still live. They'll just readapt their entire root system to handling what you did to them. It'll kill a lot of other plants. So anyway, now if you plant it at this level, and we're faced with Santa Anas. Now this year we haven't seen any Santa Anas. It's been very tropical this fall so far. We haven't had any inside slider storms that give us the winds so far. But if we do get Santa Ana winds when you initially install your rose, what you would do is you'd scrape up so you plant your rose normally, water it real thoroughly, get the soil nice and muddy, and then you would just take this dirt and pile it over most of the stems. So you cover with mud. Don't use compost for that. Compost eats up plants. That's its job. Compost is all this bacteria that's eating plants. So do not cover it with potting soil or planter mix. I did that one year just because I didn't have enough dirt around, so I just covered compost over it. They sprouted, but when I uncovered the rose, all the leaves down here were eaten up. They're just, the veins were left. The compost had eaten the leaves. The bacteria in the compost eats vegetation, so it ate all my lower leaves off. So I'll never do that again. You just cover with dirt. And if you don't have any dirt, the LA Times had an article saying, make a tube out of newspaper rolled up. So it's a smaller amount of dirt, and just throw dirt in the cone of newspaper. In fact, the rolled up newspaper alone may keep it humid enough inside there so that you don't have to have the dirt inside. But wet dirt is very moist, and it will hydrate the plants and get them to sprout despite heavy winds around them. So for many years, the 90s, because we were having 90s and 2000s, a lot of Santa Ana winds during that time, I did cover up most of my roses with dirt. Of course, 3 years ago, we had 28 inches of rain. We didn't have to do that. 2 years ago, we didn't do it either, but last year was that nasty Santa Ana in January. And we did have people bringing back shriveled up cane roses, but all we had to do was throw them underneath our blanket, our wet blanket, which we watered several times a day. If you have it at your house, I don't know if a wet blanket will work unless you're there several times a day keeping it wet. But dirt works just fine. And you can leave it covered if you want, it'll root out, or just after a few weeks, you see the sprouts coming out the tips, just wash it off. Now, distance apart between roses, on average, we go 3 feet between rose plants, but there are no rules there. I made a rose hedge once out of all the same rows, put them 18 inches apart. They are less disease prone if they're further apart from each other. So like I saw a good rose garden in Malibu, right on the ocean, and they have the roses spaced 10 feet apart. So plenty of room between the roses, great air circulation, you get less diseases. So if the roses are real close together, 3 feet apart would be, that's about 3 feet apart. Looks like a lot of distance, but these roses will fill in about 3 foot, so they'll touch. And when you have roses touching, the diseases can transfer from plant to plant easier. But you can still get diseases even if they're not touching, and even if you have good air circulation, because disease spores float in the air also. So 3 foot is average. And in rose gardens, we often do a double row of roses. So you have rose plant, rose plant, rose plant, then another row of roses 3 feet from them. But you don't want deeper than that because you've got to get in there and prune roses. So you want access routes on both sides of that. If you have more room between the rows, of course, you can make a big mass planting of roses. So usually we let the roses start growing first before we then go ahead and cover the ground up. So when my own front yard roses, what we would do is cover them. I mean, I would, every year I'd clean off all the dead stuff on the ground, anything laying on the ground underneath my roses, and throw underneath my fruit trees in the backyard. I didn't want to throw it away. It's still, if it's dead stuff, it's still valuable for the garden. And then I would layer on about a ½ inch of a nutritious compost. And we have two kinds of nutritious compost that we sell. One's called garden compost, and the other one's Happy Frog soil conditioner. We don't use it as a soil conditioner. We use it as a nutritious mulch on top of the ground because we don't put compost in the dirt anymore. So we lay it on top, and then on top of that, I'll put about 2 inches of bark on top of that to stop weeds, hold in the moisture, insulate the ground better. This garden compost disappears within a year, so it's not a permanent mulch on top, but the bark will last the entire year. And every year I would strip this off and redo it once a year. And the garden compost, which has a little chicken manure in it, would feed my roses for the entire year. We found out we didn't have to fertilize the roses when we put down a ½ inch of garden compost around the roses. So it has enough. It doesn't say what's in it, but the roses just keep growing, making new flowers the entire year. If they keep doing that, then you're fine. So just so you know, the average time it takes, if you have a rose here and you need to get rid of the rose hip, because this can make a little rose apple, which has got a seed in it, and that'll stall it from making a new rose for at least a month or even 2. So after the rose is finished blooming, you cut the stem back, and then it usually takes an average of 6 weeks to grow a new flower that's in bloom. So you can get a new rose. Well, you can get a rose on each stem every 6 weeks, as long as you cut it off deadheaded right after the flower is kind of spent. Now, it's not the same all year. So in the middle of summer, it's 4 weeks. Cut off a rose, you got a new rose in 4 weeks. In the middle of winter, it's 2 months, 8 weeks. But the average during the year is 6 weeks, which means you get 10 roses on each stem every year. Yes.
Well, when I deadhead roses, cut the bud off, should I be going further down the stem to cut it?
It depends on what you want the rose to do. So florists, so on this particular plant, these stems started from the dirt. So they grew, what, 2.5 feet to get to this point where it bloomed. Now, a florist rose grower wants a long stem. And what they find is that the farther back they cut this, all the way to, say, here, then the new rose that comes out of there is going to have a longer stem. But it takes longer to get to the flower. So it might take 2 months if you cut it down to here. If you just cut it here, it might take 4 weeks. So if you want more flowers, you cut less off. If you want longer stems, you cut more off. So
yeah, these are as tall as I want them to be.
Right. So the rules that we used to follow, which we don't anymore, but which we used to follow, they used to have pamphlets, written on pruning roses properly. They would tell you to take it down to the first 5 leaflet leaf. Now this leaf only has 3, this only has 3, this has 5.
Huh.
So whatever comes out of this point will have a better looking flower than if you just cut this off. What comes out of here will have not so good looking flower. That's what we were told. And on some roses that we would grow in my yard, your first 5 leaflet leaf was this far down the stem. They had single leaflet leaves and near the top, then 3 leaflet leaves, and you'd have 5, and then near the bottom you might have a 7. Here's a 7 leaflet leaf. So we had all these pamphlets on how to prune roses right. And to get rid of too many stems, you want to get rid of some of those so they have more room. But in England, what they did about 20 years ago is they wanted to do an exact test to see what it actually did to the roses, to do that careful pruning. So they had 50 roses on this side that were pruned by the best rosarians in England, supposedly the best rosarians in England. And the roses on this side were just cut by machine. They just chopped the dead flowers off. And so during the year, they would observe and write down how many quality roses each side made. And after 1 year, they said, we saw no difference between the best rosarians pruning the roses in this machine. So they said they ran it for 5 more years and never saw any difference. So apparently, if you just get rid of the spent flower, so it doesn't spend its time making seeds, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I mean, there's certain looks we like on a rose, not to be too crowded or not to be real bushy, and that you'd have to prune a certain way. But to get quality flowers, apparently, it didn't make any difference at all. So now they have pamphlets on how to prune a rose with chainsaws, because they're having so much trouble finding people who want to volunteer and prune the public rose gardens, that they would just use a chainsaw, and it wouldn't make any difference. So
I have another question. I have chickens, and I clean their coop, and I keep the chicken coop in a little container. Anyway, it's my understanding that chicken poop is too hot to use on some things.
Well, it's real concentrated. It's when they say birds poop pure ammonia.
Uh-huh.
So if you pile up too much fresh chicken manure around a rose, you might burn it. But if you're just sprinkling it, I mean, birds poop on nature all the time. It's not going to kill anything as long as it doesn't pile up in one big gob. So yeah.
So I could spread it around.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Is there any reason not to just throw it away, or is it better to?
Oh, you want to use it. Chicken manure is a lot of farms operate on chicken
Yeah,
manure.
that's what I understand.
Yeah.
So yes, I'll tell the girls that they're pooping okay. Thank you.
I mean, you know, the first farmers use human manure.
Oh yeah.
So, and we still do. I mean, they just process it. So, you know, all the manure made in all the human manure in LA goes through a sewage treatment plant in Carson, and that gets taken right to the farms. So, okay. The other thing about roses is the classic American rose. We like to see green stems. When the stems get real old and they get real barky, they get thicker and thicker and thicker. And apparently Americans don't like that look. So we like to eliminate the old stems and keep these young stems that are green. Well, in England, the quote English roses are the old-fashioned roses that have this look, where they have lots and lots of petals. They don't do that. David Austin, who made English roses famous throughout the world, said, I don't want you to trim any stems off for at least 3 years. We want the stems to be thicker and thicker because that makes the roses look more like this. So what's interesting was about 40 years ago, they had a guy at the Huntington Library tending the rose gardens, and he wanted to see what would happen if you made them all, he trimmed like the English roses. And I went there a few years after he had started that and looked at the roses, and these trunks on them, they're like this thick. And they said, well, they bloom a lot better. And I looked at them that spring, and I'm going, I don't recognize these roses. This says Double Delight. That looks nothing like Double Delight. And this looks nothing like they didn't look like the roses we sell. They look like English roses. They had too many petals. So apparently, if you don't trim, you know, if your stems get thicker and thicker and thicker, the flowers get more and more petals on them. But they stop looking like that and start looking like that. They're all confused, no patterns in them. They just start looking English. So you can make your roses look the way you want just by how much you prune, how much you eliminate the old stems.
So on a single plant, you can have a variety of flowers.
Yeah. Yeah, the young stems, the new stems will have simpler flowers with fewer petals and like 30, 40 petals. And then if you have a real old stem, it'll start making flowers with 100 or more petals. So. Okay, so tree roses again are a climbing stem, and they graft on the rose you want on top of that. They're usually done with this 3-foot stem. There are a few companies do a 4-foot stem because you can put, instead of putting a bush rose on top, in the past they've actually put climbing roses or cascading roses on top that would do this real pretty, but they'd have to have a taller stem to do that. Most of the mainstream growers don't do that anymore. They don't grow enough of them to make it worthwhile for them, but a lot of these small growers still do that. I mean, 30 years ago, even 20 years ago, we had 5 rose suppliers. We're actually buying roses from 5 suppliers, but most of them went out of business in the early 2000s when roses became less popular. They went out of business. So, okay. Now, care-wise, usually when you grow roses, in wintertime, we get diseases from the rain. Now, if your roses, if you cut your roses back, so traditionally, in areas that get frost, you would trim a rose back right after the last frost. Well, we didn't get any, But we used to get frosts. You know, back in the 80s, it'd get cold enough that it would defoliate our roses. And then at that time, you'd cut them back. But it doesn't happen anymore. The roses can bloom year round nowadays. Now, we may go back to having frost again. I mean, the late 80s, early 90s were the coldest temperatures ever recorded in California. And we might get that to that point again, but nowadays, they bloom all the way through winter, and sometimes you get your best looking flowers in winter. But traditionally, we were cutting the roses back in December or January, and then there was an article in the LA Times around late 80s saying, well, why do you cut your roses back so early? Because he was from New York. He says, we don't cut a rose back till April. After the snow melts, the chance of frost is gone. And your worst weather is winter when we get all these diseases on the leaves. So I thought to myself, well, let's try this. So I would, because when I'd cut them back in December, the new leaves were out in February, and the rain would hit them, and they get all rusted, and I'd have to cut all those leaves off that got rust on them. And I thought, boy, if I just wait till the end of the rainy season, then they won't get diseased anymore. So we started cutting our roses back. When those days it was April, now it's March because we're not as cold anymore. So what happens around March on a rose that looks like this, you'd see all this new growth start coming out from the base. You go, okay, this rose is wanting to grow now, so I'm going to cut it back right now, get rid of all the diseased leaves and diseased stems from the year before. And I'll have all this new fresh growth coming out. So by March, April, when you're doing that, it pretty much stops raining at that point. And I wouldn't have to treat the roses for those leaf diseases, rust and black spot. So if you get rust, this is rust in a real early stage. Whoops. So if the leaves are wet for about half a day, you get they start turning yellow, and you get these spots on top. And then when the disease is mature on the bottom, you'll see these orange patches that look like rust. And that's the spores that the disease is making. These aren't quite to that point yet, but if I had left this leaf on the plant, you'd see the orange spores on the back of that leaf. So that's from leaves staying wet for 12 hours or more. And we have had some showers the last few weeks. Or if you water your roses late in the evening and it's real humid at night, then they stay wet for a long time, and that's when you get these diseases. When it's right in the middle of winter, when it rains and it's really cold, we don't get any diseases, because diseases don't like real cold. If it's close to 40 degrees or cooler, you basically don't see disease. Diseases don't like it that cold. We get a lot of diseases as if it's still raining towards spring, because it's in the 50s and 60s, and that's what diseases like. They don't like to be too cold. So rust shows up when it's warmer, and so does black spot. Now, we didn't get black spot in California until the 1990s. It's a disease that was found back east, and it was when we had those El Niños, 94, 95, boy, it hit us really hard, because those years it rained all the way into June, and warm, wet conditions caused black spot. So on leaves you get black spot, you have this green leaf with a big yellow patch with a large fuzzy black area in it, and that's black spot. The problem with black spot is it gets into the stems of that, where the leaves attach to the stem. You'll see this purple mark on the stem, or red mark, and to get rid of it, you got to just cut that off. So that's a nasty disease because it affects the stem. Rust is just in the leaf. So if you remove the leaf, it's gone. Mildew is basically the ends of the branches. So you got to, if you have a real bad case of mildew, you got to cut that off. So those are some of the disease you can get, but you can avoid a lot of them if you just cut your roses late. Mildew we get all year, but black spot and rust, as long as you prune your roses late, after the rainy season's basically over, you won't have to treat for those. Now there is a disease called downy. So you got rust, black spot, which you really don't have to treat for those because our rainy seasons is not all year. Downy, also known as downy mildew, generally you don't have to treat for that either, although we have to treat for it. Because when we grow this here, because of lack of space, we grow them can to can, so they're real crowded. Anytime you have a real crowded rose now in your yard, hopefully it's not that crowded, but if it is, and it just stays soggy in the leaves and it's cold. So downy likes cold. So rust likes warm rain, and so does black spot, warm rain. Downy likes cold rain. And if your leaves are real congested, especially on miniature roses, now on the East Coast, they said it gets real fuzzy looking because it's so humid on the East Coast. On the West Coast, we never see the fuzz that downy causes. The leaves just turn this mottled yellow, purple, green, and then they all drop. So we just get defoliation when we get downy here. At your homes, you'll probably never see it because your roses aren't that crowded. But if you do have crowded roses and suddenly they turn yellow and mottled and drop, that's downy mildew. Now, one person on the East Coast said they cured downy just by, they connected a hose to the hot water spigot in their washing machine and just hit them with 110-degree water. Downy does not like it hot. And they said they cured it that way. But, for us, all you do is wait till warmer weather. The downy does not like any warm weather. And hot water apparently kills them too. But we do have a disease control product called Garden Foss. In case you see it, you spray with Garden Foss and that'll stop it. Most of the growers like us, the big rose growers in the area, they use Garden Foss to control downy. But that's pretty much what we do. If you have too many roses too close together, you'll see downy. If you don't, you probably never see it.
Does Garden Foss work on anything else?
It's important in the trade. So on apples and pears, it can stop fire blight.
No, I just meant for the rose.
Oh, no, that's pretty much it. But it is an important product. The nice thing about Garden Foss, in California, it's registered as a fungicide, but in a lot of states, it's not a fungicide, it's registered as a fertilizer because it's, I didn't bring a bottle up, mono and di potassium salts of phosphorus acid. Potassium and phosphorus are two fertilizers that plants need. So it's like giving a high dose of phosphorus, and that seems to help the plant fight off diseases. So these are more or less winter-related diseases when it's raining, and then around April, we get the conditions for powdery mildew. That's our famous disease. In the last 4 years, we've seen a lot of powdery mildew because we've had a lot of overcast. Powdery mildew likes 55 degrees to 85 degrees and humid conditions and cloud cover. And for us this year, it was almost the entire year. It's like it did. The last 3 years in summer, we're not losing the cloud cover. It's just weird. This summer we lost it for a whole month, but lots of mildew the last 3 years because of we're in this temperature range. I mean, you know, normal summers back in the 80s and 90s, you know, it did be 100 degrees sometime before the June gloom would come, and then right around June or July, we did 100 degrees again, and that would stop all the mildew, and we'd see 80s and 90s all summer, and not get any mildew until October again. And if October was drier, then we wouldn't see it then either. But the last 3 years, we've had mildew all summer long because we've had such nice weather. Now, the best way we control mildew is oil and baking soda. So we'd have this mineral oil. Now, there's neem oil out there. I'm not a big fan of neem oil because couple of reasons. Neem tends to burn plants easier than most oils, and neem gels at 55 degrees. So if you keep a bottle of neem oil in your outdoor cabinet, it just turns to jello. So the mineral oils tend to stay liquid, and this one's ready to use. But what we would do with this is add the baking soda right in here, and then you'd have something ready to go. You see a little mildew on the rose, you spritz it with this, and that would cure the mildew right at that point. The baking soda helps the mildew spores from regerminating for up to a week. So back in the 80s, when we didn't have downy or black spot, this is all we would use. We'd use mineral oil and baking soda on all our roses. That would kill a lot of the bugs. I'd spray them once a week. The oil made them look shiny. We were just in heaven because this oil is considered organic. You didn't smell it much, no diseases. And then in the 90s, we got black spot and we got downy coming in. We had to start using chemicals. At my house, I haven't sprayed my roses for 2 years. Of course, it hasn't rained much the last 2 years either. 3 years ago, we had the heavy rain. We got some rust. But yeah, just haven't sprayed my roses at all. But if you want to keep them mildew free, this does a good job. It's worked better than the chemicals that we sell. So we have chemicals that are supposed to prevent mildew, but they just haven't worked that well when we have all this mildew weather. The mineral oil and the baking soda have done a good job.
Does that work on thrips too?
Well, it might kill some exposed thrips. So those are the main diseases that we get on roses. So you know, mildew, you put up with it. Now, mildew likes new growth. So on this plant, mildew won't attack any of these leaves, but this new growth is very susceptible to mildew. So it's always the new growth. And if you don't treat it, what happens, the plant just stalls. Because I had a rose called Touch of Class at my first house, which was the most mildew-prone rose in my yard. And I wanted to see what happened if I just didn't treat it. So it had all these stems with rose buds on the ends, and the mildews covered the ends of all the stems. And for 2 months, it just sat there. The buds went open. They wouldn't die. They just sat there with mildew on them. I'm going, after 2 months of this, I'm going, okay. So I just cut off the entire top of that plant and regrew and started growing and flowering again. But the mildew just stops everything. It didn't, you know, it wouldn't grow any new growth. It just kept the covered rose buds, and covered in mildew wouldn't do a thing. So you don't want the mildew on there because it can stunt everything. Now we have some new essential oils like this and this that are supposed to be real good at controlling mildew. So if you want to use a plant oil instead of a mineral oil, it'd be these. This has got soybean oil, peppermint oil, citric acid. This one's got thyme oil, rosemary oil, clove oil, and peppermint oil in it. They don't work quite as well as the mineral oil, but they still, I mean, these were meant to treat marijuana plants for mildew. So apparently on marijuana, they work really good. But mildew in general, you can control with oils covering it up. So I would imagine it's still, well, we've already tried this one once and it worked okay. It wasn't as good as that, but it worked okay. So if you want to stick with plant oils instead of mineral oils, you can try these. They are more expensive. So like this guy runs $49. The same amount of mineral oil would run probably less than 10. So
What's the advantage other than ideologically?
none. I mean, if you're going to smoke it, you can't have any sign of anything that you can't
Oh,
consume.
okay. So it's on the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any disadvantage to a mineral oil? None?
I haven't seen anything. We haven't seen any. Now, the rules on oil are, with all these oils, you don't do it when it's too cold. So oils kill things. You know, oils lift off the fungus from the surface of the leaf, and they kill bugs by suffocating them, and then they evaporate and they're gone. But if it's too cold, if it's colder than 55 degrees, the oil don't evaporate well. And if the oils don't evaporate, your leaves will suffocate eventually and they'll just defoliate. So if you spray oil on leaves and it's 40 degrees, all the leaves fall off. So you have to avoid anything cooler than 55, or if it's misty or rainy out, the oil can't evaporate either because the water's covering it, and you can have the same problem. So we do oil on dry, not so cold temperatures. So in the middle of a day in winter or any time you want in summer, if it's less than 90, we'll spray the oils in the summertime. And if it's over 100, as long as you do it at night, you're still fine.
Here's a basic question. A lot of us don't have an abundance of free time. We're squeezing it in, et cetera, et cetera. And I look at a plant like that. I mean, the whole plant is developed with whatever the agent is, the deleterious agent, right? And I'm out there with a bottle. How do I know that I'm doing it? Isn't there some kind of big spray I could just go like, and then I could walk on or something like that? How do you do it effectively, rapidly?
Okay, there are some fungicides that you can pour on the ground, which for the environment isn't so good because the fungicide that's systemic, most of it stays in the ground or washes into our groundwater, and the plant absorbs some of it. But 20 years, well, even last year, you could buy a product from Bayer that did everything. Controlled the bugs, controlled diseases, you just pour it on the plant. That's off the market. Our governor or our state has decided that we can't handle stuff like that. So they pulled it all off the market. Anything that was systemic, they pulled it off the market. So you can go to Arizona and buy it. But so roses were really easy up until last year. You just put this stuff on the ground and you didn't have to do anything.
Did you do that?
No, no. To me, it's too much poison.
Okay.
So you're poisoning your ground and the environment just to save some time, but it wasn't. We're a plot in the city. It's not that big a deal. We poison the environment a lot of different ways other than that, but those were taken off the market, so it's not so easy to get that easy rose anymore. I mean, Bayer got real big because they had that starting in the late 90s, and it made it real easy for people to grow roses. You know, killed the diseases, killed the bugs, fertilized the plant all at the same time. I mean, at my house, I don't do anything, and they still look okay. So they're not perfect, but I still get enjoyment out of them. Okay, so that's your diseases. Bug-wise, so usually what happens, the first bugs you see are aphids on the new growth. Now, you don't have to treat for aphids. Eventually, they get killed off by either ladybugs or syrphid flies or all the beneficial insects that eat them. We'll find them. But it does make the first set of flowers pretty sticky looking because the aphids excrete sugar water, makes everything sticky. Once they excrete that sugar water, the ladybugs smell it, all the other bugs smell it. By the time the first roses are open, they're gone, and they don't come back there because they're being killed off by the beneficials. So if you want to just leave that alone, that works. The second bug out that's real bad, let's write these down. So the first bugs out are usually aphids. Now at the nursery we treat them because we don't want customers to see the ends of the branches covered by sticky bugs. And we'll use, well, the oils do a pretty good job killing them. These multiple oil essential oils actually do a little better job at killing them. If you want to really kill them dead, you use one of these chemical pesticides. So the chemical pesticides we have now for aphids are they're called pyrethroids, which are among chemical poisons relatively safe among mammals and the environment. So pyrethrum was the first of this group, and it's the sap of a chrysanthemum flower. It was noted for killing bugs, but after using it for a couple generations, the bugs that are left are all immune to that one, the original pyrethroid sap. So over time, chemists have made slight variations of it, and they're called the pyrethroids, which are still very safe around mammals comparatively. And all your indoor pesticides, like from Raid, Black Flag, they're all types of pyrethroids. So like on Black Flag, you'll see the name tetramethrin. Anything that ends in the letters THRIN is one of the pyrethroids. And there's, like this is cyfluthrin, and this is lambda cyhalothrin. This is the newest one out, so this is probably going to be the most effective because they said on average, if they treat one insect with a pyrethroid for 3 years, by the end of the third year, that bug is now immune to that because you've killed off all the ones that were susceptible. And the only one that's left, ones are left are now immune. So they have to make new versions of this every so often to be effective on your plants. But this one here, which is the newest one on the market, would probably kill the aphids a lot better. If you want to kill them right now, if you don't want to see them. So aphids are the first bug out. The second one is called the Western flower thrip. Thrip's got an S on the end. And it causes the edges of the petals of the roses to turn brown. And that's pretty much it. The Western flower thrip is a real small insect, about the size of a sliver. The adults fly. They find flower buds that are just starting to open. You see this color through the bud there. They'll lay like 50 eggs on each bud. Their larvae go inside the outer petals of the flower and suck on them. so the edges turn brown. Kind of like that. This is supposed to be a cream colored rose and all the edges have turned brown. And that's the damage they do, the only damage they do. So to cure that, and they like light colored roses, so white, peach, yellow, the light colored roses get it. The darker colored roses, like the red ones, don't ever seem to get it. They're not attracted to that color. So to control flower thrips, you can spray. Now the best control we have is spinosad. And we use the spinosad soap because it's got soap in there. The problem with the other spinosad products I have, you spray it on a rosebud, it doesn't stick. Rosebuds are so waxy that it won't stick. This one with the soap in it should stick a lot better. You just spritz, so as each bud shows color, you spritz it. And if you do all your rosebuds for a couple of weeks, you cut the cycle of the flower thrips. They suck on the flowers. The larvae drop to the dirt, pupate in the ground, fly back up, and start the next generation. If you spray the buds for 2 weeks, maybe 3, that'll pretty much stop it for the year in your garden on the flower thrips. And then when summer comes, well, okay, another bug that we get is called a rose slug. This one you find a lot, especially on the coastline. So you go to a coastal garden and all the lower leaves on the roses are laced out. So there's a worm-like bug. It's an insect that just starts eating between the veins of your roses, and it looks like a piece of lace. It's called a rose slug. The adult is a stingless, real small wasp that I've never seen. His larvae are, I had a person bring a leaf in once, it was all laced out. What's eating this? And she's holding a leaf, and I just point out, okay, there's one slug there, one slug there, one slug. She couldn't see them because they're green, and they kind of match. It's hard to see them on the leaf. But she had like 9 rose slugs on that leaf she brought in. She couldn't see them. But they can attack several, I think there's 3 to 5 generations a year. This stuff also works really good on them. So spinosad has a 2-week residual. It's organic. Spinosad is a product of bacteria that was found in a rum distillery in the Caribbean. So apparently people have drunk this. And it is a highly used chemical in veterinary medicine. Because my dog's flea tablets are spinosad. You feed your dog spinosad, and it kills all the fleas on the outside of its body. And it kills all the heartworms inside its body. It's like, oh. So apparently it's really safe because we've already drank it. But it kills chewing insects and thrips really, really well. Really well. Again, if you only use spinosad, they eventually become immune to it. So it's nice to have more than one product. But rose slugs you don't see very often. It's the best product for that. So most of us don't. I haven't seen rose slugs for like 10 years. Every so often we see them inland. But if you're on the coast, that's a real common pest. And then this year, for the first time in 4 years, a bad case of chili thrips. And chili thrips needed to be at least 85 degrees out, it seems.
Are the western flower thrips at a certain temperature?
We see them in the spring, so they don't need it hot. They're they can be out in March or April, so they don't need it hot at all. But the chili thrips only show up when it's hot. So they're a similar thrip, and they did this. So you can see all these leaves that are damaged. We spray our roses constantly, so there's no sign of that damage. But this is from a friend's yard. They don't spray anything, and all these leaves are damaged. So the chili thrip not only goes after the flower petals, it goes after all the new leaves on that branch. And in some of the worst cases, this never opens. It just is brown. All these leaves are shriveled up. And people are coming in, starting around late July this year. We started seeing these because we had a warmer summer, almost normal weather this summer. I don't know what happened if we get a hot summer, but almost normal weather this summer. So we're seeing the chili thrips, and they're saying my roses stopped blooming. So it can really shut a rose down, especially if it's a light colored rose. In this rose garden, there is a dark pink rose, no sign of anything. But this light color rose totally messed up. The double delight they had there was in between. It wasn't as bad. But some of the light colored roses totally messed up by this chili thrip. So again, spinosad is our main thing we use. But if you only use that, they can become immune to it. So we have to use something else. These two say they'll kill thrips. So you'll have to use this one. This one's the newest one, so this will probably work better. Because spinosad is supposed to kill 94% of all thrips. The product we were using as an alternate last year was Merit, which California got rid of. So we can't use Merit anymore. Merit said it killed 94% of thrips also, and hopefully not the same 94% the spinosad did. So alternating those two would work. Now we've got to alternate something different like this or this, which may not kill 94%, but hopefully they'll kill the 6% that spinosad doesn't kill.
When you say alternate, do you use one, and then for a certain period of time, and then you start to see a recurrence of it, and then you go to the other one? Or do you, when you do a plant, do you do one time and then the other one the other time to?
Like every 2 weeks?
Okay, so what the quote experts tell us to do, they say use one product twice and then use the other product twice, because you may not kill them all with one dose, and you want to kill as many as you can with the one dose. So hit it twice with the spinosad, then hit it twice with the other product, and then go back to spinosad. It depends what we're doing that week. There's a lot of other plants we spray spinosad on constantly, so we just do that all the time. But now and then we'll pick up some other product and hit it. So we have to break the cycle at some point. But spinosad's so important for us. We hit that almost every week for other plants. So we just hit the roses since we're using it. So spinosad's the main one, and then one of these other pyrethroids.
How long does it take you to do? I mean, again, I just go back to my thing. Is that, I want to do something. I want to do something and get it done. And you say you use it a lot. How long does it take you to do this?
Well, when we were growing 14,000 roses, it would take a long time. I'd have to fill up. So I use a 4-gallon backpack sprayer, and I'd have to fill it up 4 times to do. Well, after we sold about 10,000 roses, I'd have to spray. So for 10,000 roses, that would be about 2 hours of work. Now, in Mahona, I had a 50 rose, when I was single, I had a 50 rose garden. I kept it perfect. And that would probably take me a half hour a week to take care of them. Maybe an hour if I was doing a lot of stuff, but half hour a week to do 50 wasn't that bad. Then once I had kids, I'd spend about a half hour a month because I didn't have time to do it anymore. But I still had the best looking roses on the street, just not perfect. And if you want a spotless rose, it takes a bit of work. I mean, it was so spotless. When I was single, that my neighbors would tell me once, there was a florist truck in front of your house cutting all your roses. Which made me proud. I mean, the florists were actually taking my roses. They thought they were so nice that they were taking them. It didn't bother me that much that they were doing that. It made me felt good. But they were spotless roses.
Did they tell you they were cutting it?
Pardon?
Did they tell you they were cutting your roses?
No.
They were just stealing your roses. They were stealing your roses.
Yeah.
That's right. Wow.
But it didn't upset me that much because they were,
They were enjoying it,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
But what I did, see, once I did, is I started getting my paper punch and punching holes in the leaves. That kind of stopped them after a while.
That took some time.
It didn't take much time. Now, there's one other bug that can cause trouble. That's cane borers. I haven't seen these for a while, but you might get them. So after you clip your deadhead your rose and cut it down, back in the 80s, we used to get a bug that would drill straight down that stem about 3 or 4 inches. So the rose would regrow from down here, the ends would die.
It was like a little fly.
Cane borers apparently are stingless wasps also, and they lay eggs on cut surfaces, and the larvae just drill into it and eat it up. Just a couple, like 3 or 4 inches. So the rose would start growing from here. So you get all these dead ends, which, it's not that big a deal, but I didn't want to see that back when I was single. So what you do is you cover the cut end with something. Now, some people use a piece of tape. Some people use Vaseline. A lot of people use nail polish. I didn't have any nail polish, so I covered it with pruning tar, and that would stop them. As long as they don't smell that cut end, then they wouldn't bother it. So, but I used to have, we used to have a lot of cane borers, and every single stem would be drilled into that was thicker than, say, a 1/4 inch. They would drill it. So we would cover those ends with something. Yes.
When I cut mine down, I've heard the 6-leaf rule or whatever, and now I just give it up. It looks good, cut it down enough, right? And then I'll come back at a period of time, and I may not remember it, but sometimes there's the cuts here, and then there's this black dead stem part. And it goes down so far, and where it ends, maybe the connection to a main stem. Is that a sign of just the natural cutting, or is it that stem?
Yeah, we can talk about that a bit.
How do you make the diagnosis? Here's a question. You take out a microscope and take a look. I mean,
You bring it here, it's so good.
I'm waiting till my lecture's over. I've got a dead microphone for him.
Okay, so on plants, if you want to be perfect with your rose, the leaves are attached. There's a little bud. Well, there's a series of buds above each leaf where it's attached. So usually when you cut it, we'll cut it a little above the bud and go behind it. So this new bud will sprout that direction, and the stem will then grow like this. And if you left anything up here, the plant can't use that anymore. All this stuff dies up here. So you have a little dead end that you've left, which not a big deal. The plant just dies down to this area where the new growth occurs, it'll grow and then become that area, and this will be just a dead end that you've left. So you cut it right above the bud and go behind it, so there's less dead area that you've left.
So you're cutting
Above the bud, so, and the bud's on the same side as the leaf is attached. So, well, like on this particular stem here, we cut above the bud, but a little bit too far above it, so this will die back to that area, so you'll have a dead end there. But the bud will come out, the new branch should come out here. Now, sometimes you say, okay, I want this one to grow because it's going outwards, and then this one on this side sprouts instead. I mean, the rose doesn't always do what you want it to, but usually there's a bud and there's a series of buds above each leaf attachment. Now, what happens, what you'll notice, is that where this branch grows, it cuts off the circulation of that leaf. So wherever you cut a branch to, the leaf that was attached right there is cut off. So it just turns yellow and dies. So you'll see a lot of that going on roses, where the leaf, right where the new stem grows, this one's going to die first. Because as this stem grows, it cuts off the circulation to that leaf. Like this one already fell off, or that stem's growing. So you see a lot of yellow leaves. Rose leaves only look good for about 6 or 8 months max. So if you want your roses to stay looking good, and when this was what I did when I was single. So when I was single, they're making all these new canes with new leaves. I'd get in there in the summer and cut off all the older canes, so they wouldn't have any of the old leaves around. So it'd be forced to make new leaves all year, because I'd keep on cutting off anything that was aging on my rose. So it kept it looking really good. That's a lot of work to keep it that clean. And some roses refuse to make new canes. I mean, I had a Princess of Monaco rose, and it never made a single new cane. The old cane stayed there, kept blooming. It refused to make new stems. So I couldn't do anything on that one. But a lot of roses make lots of new canes from the bottom. Olympiad at my house, Olympiad red rose, would make 20 new canes every year. And it was my prettiest rose bush, because everything was always green on it. What I considered pretty. Pardon?
When you say new canes, would you skin them from the?
Yeah, from the very bottom.
Coming down?
Not from the roots, but at that place where it was grafted, they'd be coming right out of there. A whole bunch of them every year.
Is there any way you could get it to do that? I mean, you said just cutting it back.
Some roses are more prone to do that. Some roses just refuse.
I think I have a couple of refusals.
Yes, in the American Rose Society, they had things that you can try. They said if you got too much bark building up, sometimes if you get a wire brush or a, steel wool, and you really scrape off the bark, sometimes they'll regrow from an area where you take off the outer bark. I don't know if that works, but or just plant new ones every now and then. Plant a fresh new rose. So. Okay, let's see what else. So fertilizer-wise, I was using a compost. They make special fertilizers for roses. Now, the most interesting one is this, and we can all tell this was created by a guy, Magnum Rose Grow. But anyway, Dr. Tommy Cairns, who was a chemist, says developed by Dr. Tommy Cairns. He volunteered or worked at, he was a chemist, but he worked at the Rose Hills in Whittier. And he analyzed the soil and their water and said, this is what we need to feed the roses. So this is meant for a local rose garden, and people who use it just love it. They say, yeah, that makes the roses look really good because it's got everything in it. It is a chemical fertilizer, but it is quite accurate for roses because it was developed by a chemist who was into this stuff.
I've been using I put it in a watering can. I guess that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, watering can.
Does it work?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We have a lot of customers who buy. I have a customer who buys it in the 25-pound bags.
Are there related plants that would benefit from that too?
It'll work on most things. I mean, most plants can get by on most fertilizer. It's not a big deal, but it was interesting that he made it specifically for that area. Now we may not be exactly the same, but we got to be close, water quality wise and soil nutrients and all that. We use Osmocote in our containers because it's too much work to keep on. You know, they use that about every 2 weeks. This one we use once every 5 months. So it's just, we can put a rose in a pot and sell it before we have to fertilize again. If we have to fertilize again, we then switch to something organic and throw it on top of the pot. Just because if you stay with the chemical too long, it usually misses something. So there's 13 minerals that plants we have to apply. 4 minerals are either in water or air, but 13 minerals we have to apply. Organics tend to have all 13 because these are either ground up plants or animals that have all 13. The chemicals, I've not seen one yet that has all 13. So they're missing 1 or 2. Now, usually the soil has 1 or 2 that they are missing. But if you want to just play it safe, use an organic. And organics are better for the environment, better for the soil in the long run. Because this feeds organisms that live in the soil that make the soil fluffier. The mycorrhizal fungi makes the soil fluffier. Other bacteria and amoebas that live in the soil make the soil fluffier, better habitat for the roots. So in the long run, organics work better, but you can get by with the chemicals for quite a while. And we have 2 brands of organic fertilizers pretty much nowadays. Plus we have chicken manure, which works quite well too. Now I was going to mention, if you want to grow them in pots, these number 5 containers are just too small. You can't grow a rose to its full size in that. People who really grow a lot of roses will use a half barrel. So this 25-gallon, I didn't want to drag the half barrel in here, but the 25-gallon container, 20 to 25 is a half barrel size because barrels are either 52 or 55 gallons, or are they 55 or 58? Anyway, half barrels are around 25 gallons, 20 to 25 gallons. So you can grow a rose full size in this. 15-gallon isn't bad, but you can't quite get, you have to water real often here because they'll be using all the water in it real fast. In our top pot potting soil is what we recommend, but you can use pure sand or any combination of our top pot and pure sand will work on roses.
Well, how would you do that? Well, how would you use both? How would you use both top pot and sand?
You can use any combination you want. So pure sand will grow roses just fine. Pure top pot roses just fine. Any combination of the 2 you want to make will work.
Well, see, do you mix it, or do you, or do you layer sand at a certain point and then the top pot at a certain point?
You could do that too. Anything you want to do will work because rose grows in both. So if you generally what you would do is put the coarser product on top because water goes toward finer texture and sand would be a finer texture than our top pot. So if you put sand on top of the top pot won't get thoroughly wet because the sand will be holding the water above the top pot. If you put clay on top of the sand, the water will stay in the clay and won't really get the sand wet. So you've got to put the coarser things on top if you're going to layer it.
Okay.
So
Is there a certain percentage, like I mean,
No, they both work.
Okay. But I guess
100% to 100%. Anything in between works.
Okay.
So
Thanks.
let's see if anything else we need to cover. Now, roses tend to be top-heavy looks-wise in the garden. You know, they're all vase-shaped. So some of the favorites that people put underneath roses in their rose garden, some of these scrambling geraniums, which can bloom year-round. This is Roseanne. There's another one that's real similar that's called Tiny Monster. And they'll grow 8 inches high, cover up the base of the roses, but won't climb through them. And then ivy geraniums are famous for use under roses too, because they'll just cover the ground. And they like part sun. Same with the other geraniums, crane's bills. So those are some. I've used some of the shorter ornamental grasses. I put some of the shorter daylilies around them to hide the base of the rose garden. There's a lot of things you can do there too.
Garlic.
Garlic? Oh yeah, society garlic. Yeah, I've done that too.
What'd you say?
Garlic.
Any other questions today? Anything? I mean, I haven't shown you many rows. How they? Well, in fact, the new rose that we're interested in this year to see how it does. Now and then they bring out something that we're interested in. The Martha Stewart rose. Oh.
So what's the most popular flower?
Rose? Or
Roses are still the most popular.
among blooming shrubs, yeah, there's not many blooming shrubs. You have hydrangeas, you have camellias, hibiscus, but roses are still, I mean, we're still selling about over 1,000 roses a year. We're nothing like, you know, like our list this year, we have about 100 roses on it. In the 1990s, we had 300 varieties of roses we're selling. 300. I mean, truthfully, there's a lot of them that are so alike that it's not essential to carry that many. So we're trying to weed out the ones, you know, there are a lot of famous names that we used to carry just because the names were famous. Tropicana, things like that we just don't think are worth selling. So we don't get those anymore. We just try to carry the ones that we like to sell. But there are still nurseries like Reagan Nursery in Northern California. I've talked to them a lot. They bring in like 400,000 roses every year. I mean, just huge numbers. I don't know if they still do it. And they said they buy from every rose grower in the U.S. that they can, that they'll sell to them. We use a local big grower too that I think they do a couple 100,000 roses a year. That's Otto and Sons in Fillmore. But yeah, the most we ever did was 14,000, which was still a lot. That's still like a whole acre of roses. Yes.
Hopefully, last question. How does a person who inherits a house with pre-existing roses, how does he make the diagnosis? How does he go and say, this is? I mean, we just look at them. Oh, they're blooming. That's great. And then how does an amateur or a neophyte begin to say, hey, this is wrong. I should change this.
Just bring in samples and photos to us.
But it's in the pot on my property, and I mean, and some of them do well, and some then we buy something new, and it's a double flowering one, Joey's orange or whatever. And how does a person advance? How does a homeowner advance to be knowledgeable about what he's doing and do something that's positive rather than just take out his clippers? Yeah.
Well, there's certainly a lot of information on the internet, and then there are local clubs. So the Orange County Rose Society, Saddleback Mountain Rose Society, South County, Orange County Rose Society, and forget where they meet, Costa Mesa. There's the American Rose Society that has lots of magazine articles about roses.
Is there a simple first step?
I mean, I learned most of what I learned.
I've listened quite well.
I learned most of what I learned when I joined the American Rose Society. So there, technically they have a lot of good articles in their magazine. I hope they still exist. I'm pretty sure they still do, American Rose Society. And they, used to get their magazines once a month, and they'd have all this technical information, all the new research being done. So. And then they'd have a lot of, they have articles from beginners as well as the big pros and the researchers.
Orange County Rose Society, they spelled it.
Mm-hmm.
In Westminster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you go there and you learn from everyone who's there how to grow them. I've not been a member of any the local clubs, although I've spoken with them a lot. So. But just doing it, you tend to find out what's going on just by doing it. Because I started growing roses in 1980. I told my dad these roses we sell could look better, so I took over that section of our business first, and that's how you become an expert. You just start doing it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yay.